We're very lucky today to have colleagues from Withensea and South Tees ready to share some of their experience, and so we can look at some of the sort of distinctiveness of storytelling approaches and what they bring, but also, you know, start to be honest about some of the challenges. What we'll try and do is spend a bit of time looking at those two experiences and then layering in a conversation around your own experiences around storytelling so that we can start to connect some of the dots. And we'll end the session by spending a bit of time looking at if there are emerging issues or challenges that we'd like to spend a bit more time as a group discussing further. So we've got quite a lot to sort of fit in, and we'll do our best to cover what we can. But with the promise of further sessions, I think it will be really, really nice just to start opening and teasing out some of those aspects of storytelling. So essentially what we aim to do is we'll spend a little bit of time looking at Withensea's experience and delve into that a bit together. We'll then spend a bit of time looking at South Tees' experience and delving into that, and then sort of zoom out a little bit to some of the broader issues that people want to bring to the table and look at emerging insights and do a little bit of that together. So that's the kind of plan for the session in overview. Any questions before I go further? Anything else anyone wants to raise? Does that sound okay? Okay, well, just to kick us off then, because we're quite a large group, what we want to do is just very quickly go into a short buzz for a few minutes in groups of 3. And really, this is just so you can have a bit of a chat with some of the other colleagues on the call. Well, let's focus it around an observation or insight or opinion you have around the use of stories and how that links to your learning and evaluation. But of course, you don't have to only focus on that. It'd be nice just to sort of get to know each other a little bit. So what we're going to do is spend literally 5 minutes in those groups of 3, just getting to know each other. But hopefully you had the beginnings of a get to know each other anyway. So without further ado, let's look at the Withensea sort of case experience. And Esther and Lloyd, I don't know which one of you is presenting, or whether you want to share your slides, or whether you want us to do that for you.
We'll share them, and we just had a little practice before we came on, but we were on Teams. I totally forgot it was Zoom, so I'm hoping we can play a video that's embedded. Okay. So bear with, but I'll do the presenting if that's all right, and then we'll see.
Of course.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So you should be a co-host, so you should be able to do that.
Yeah. It's not showing up. There it is.
I know the Teams and the Zoom differences, I think, catch a lot of us out.
Yeah, I don't know whether I've please bear with. I just want to let me just see if there's anything. Let me just stop and just make sure I'm not missing anything on this page that allows the optimize for. Yeah, let's do that. That'll do it better. Yeah, there it is. Sorry, a bit of faffing now will save us the pain in the middle, I think.
No worries. It's
right. I'll kick straight off, and Lloyd's ready there as well. I'll get on there. Right. So yeah, we'd said about we do storytelling in quite a few different ways, and so Rob was asking about this session, and so we said, yeah, I don't think it's a complete storytelling kind of suite, but it's certainly we do use and collect stories a lot. So a bit of background from me, and then I'm going to move on. Lloyd's going to do the actual telling because he works on the ground with these stories a lot. So a bit of background to Active Withensea. We're the smallest LDP, and you can see on that map we're right at the, I don't know, I was going to say arse end of nowhere, but probably just out of the way, where there's no railway line. You know, we really are quite isolated in many ways. So there's 6,000 population, 10,000 if we include the outlying villages, and it is really rural and coast. Our team on the ground is we have our operational lead who works with the team on the ground to make things happen, to actually do the support with the people who get grants or develop projects or whatever. And then we've got the evaluation lead who's Lloyd, who's here with us today. We've got 3 development officers on the ground who are doing the work. We've got 1 grant officer who works with people from the community to so that they can put something together that enables them to get a grant for whatever it is they want to do. We've got a support, an analyst evaluation support for Lloyd, who helps collecting some of these stories and having these interviews. And we've got like an admin coordinator person who helps them hang it all together. We also have ARC Research, who are our external evaluators, and you can see Tom and Sharon there, and they support the evaluation, how it it develops and grows. They help us interpret some of that data and how we use it, and do some work with the team as well. And we also have some light touch support from Gerald Midgley on systems thinking, so that's inside of our evaluation as well. A bit about the context is there's no existing services or interventions that we're building on. So we're not building on an existing physical activity and program, or or set of existing kind of groups that are working on this from the council or elsewhere. So we're completely standalone, although we are housed in the council, if you like, but we're not building on something that's already there. So we work really closely with residents, but it's really kind of raw, I guess you'd say. And we work with local organisations and groups using the grant scheme that I've alluded to. And we've just launched a community network where more focus will be running forward, so that the community are holding things for themselves, including those organisations that also have quite an impact on the community. And now I'm handing over to Lloyd so he can tell you a bit more about the stories.
Thanks, Esther. So we have a few ways that we do tell stories with Active Whimsy, but we're just going to focus on 3 main ones today. So the first couple of slides looking at how we show system change. Well, a big part of what we do is kind of changing system to impact physical activity within Whimsy. So we've got a couple of examples of how we are doing, showing how we tell the story, how we're doing that, focusing on one specific project with Adapted Bikes. The first one we've got is a video of Adam, who is the development worker working on that, telling us a bit of the background on how we kind of are creating this system change with this project. Esther, do you want to play it?
Okay. Can people hear it?
Yeah.
So this is the Adapted Bike project, and as part of Active Whimsy, we're focusing on people doing cycling in the area. We found that there wasn't much opportunity for people with disabilities or people unable to cycle, so that's when we found wonderful bicycles called the Adapted Bikes, and that's given the opportunity for places such as Victoria Day Centre and Cascade that are local to Whimsy area who focus on these people with disabilities, and that's given them the opportunity to be able to cycle. So we've brought those 2 partners in together. So they're working closely together, sharing resources to be able to promote these adapted bikes and use them in the community. So partnership work is a huge thing that Active Whimsy are based on to create that sustainability offer in the town. So it was straight a go-to see if these 2 services wanted to combine together to try and start creating that sustainable offer. And building these 2 services together that weren't necessarily working that closely before, they're starting to share resources and starting to share other ideas of how they can progress this project. It was great to see Cascade users and Victoria Day Centre users cycling on these bikes, but it was a point where we wanted to use the offer for the community, and that's where we've got Blue Doors involved, who can maintain the bikes. That allows Active Whimsy to step away slightly, so this project can carry on further in the future. And now we're starting to see that some of the care homes in the town want to get involved. Now we're starting to use them in the community. So we're trying to make this real community offer where it can be sustainable for longer than Active Whimsy will be here for. And I think that all comes from Victoria Day Centre, Cascade and Blue Doors all working strongly together to try and promote those other things that they can lead into as well.
Well, I was going to say a real quick video just to show kind of one of the ways that we are.
So this is the Adapted Bike.
Sorry, there we are. I've done it.
And then, so on the next slide, we also have our flashcards. So this is very much focusing on the adapted bike still, but this is more about the actual behaviours and the impact of them behaviours that Adam used to kind of create that system change around adapted bikes of what was happening. So to kind of develop these, we do system change conversation between myself, and Tom and Sharon, who Ashley mentioned before from Arc Research, we will speak to the team about what system changes they're seeing within WMSU in the work we're doing in the pilot, but also just general more like stuff that's happening in Refined Council that we also work a part of. And when we're seeing kind of instances or examples of system change, we'll talk to them and like have a bit of an interview and finding out what their behavior, what actually happened, what the system that change was. Then looking at the behaviours that are done for it. So, for example, listening to people, responding quickly, helping to scaffold. So we're not doing things, we're just making sure we're supporting people to do it. And then what impact that has on physical activity. So we found that we then have an illustrator called Sarah Smith, who is great and can illustrate all these things up for. So we asked her to design these up. So it's a really good way to kind of to show a very visual way how system change works and how we're impacting system change. Because that's something that we find quite dry. This is a nice way to show that, and something people can take away and look at broad times. We have a few of these that we're putting together, and hopefully we're going to continue building on this kind of way of showing telling stories. If you want to go to the next slide, Esther. So the last one I want to talk about today we use is something called process charts. This is conversations that myself and our research analysts have with the development officers. So we'll do this for each of the stories, each of the projects even that we're working on. So it helps us to understand the projects, the kind of how they've come to be, where they started from, understand some of the highs, some of the successes from it, but also some of the lows, so some of the challenges and frustrations, and what are the lessons learned from this. Then if somebody was going to want to set up a similar kind of project, we have this learning that we've already got, and say to people like this, so you can take away this, what we've done already and help support that. It also ensures reflection. It helps the development officer to reflect on what's gone on so far in the project, where they're at, and maybe what they need to do next. We don't always have that time for working live to really put in that reflection time and really think about what the next step need to be. So by doing these with the team, it allows them to kind of just have that 1 hour kind of few months to really reflect on their behavior, what's going on, and their actions and things like that to move forward. It then allows us to notice common themes across the project. So some of the common themes that we noticed in our kind of need to be an end goal. We need to take things slow, so don't get too caught up in the excitement of it, and make sure there's that slow kind of pace with it, and not to kind of lead the project, to allow residents or partners to kind of take that lead on where they're to kind of support and scaffold rather than kind of lead it and deliver that, and allow people to maintain regular connections with everyone, so that the relationship develop and maintain over time. We'll come back to the questions in the end. I've just seen something pop up. There's something that really helps kind of the team to moving forward and think about their projects. We'll go on to the next slide, Esther. So kind of just how we use these different memes that we've got here, and some of the other kind of ways to tell stories why include like a case studies, things like that. So we have taken the video and the flashcards to conferences. This last year we tried to the Humber conference to show people outside of kind of Scotland and outside of the kind of the LDP what we're doing to kind of get more people excited by like things like system change and get people to buy in. We put things on social media, we can put the videos on there, we can put our case studies on there. Again, it helps people to help try and buy other people to try and really come forward or get involved with this activity or come talk to us about grants. We feedback to the development officers, especially the process chats and then common things we're seeing. We feed that back to development officers quite regularly and say, this is what we're hearing, this is what you guys are seeing, and how can this impact the project further on. And then future plans, we have a website we are currently looking at developing, which will show all our learning and the journey back to WMSA, and hopefully we're going to try and aim at different audiences. So you could have, for example, the flashcards, which is more strategic and more about system change, will be able to done on there for people that are wanting to see that kind of information, but also have some of the kind of the case studies or the how kind of the project develop on there. Well, for people that are wanting like to develop grassroots kind of clubs and understanding what might be difficult and what comes up there, to really focusing on different audiences and getting as much of our story out there as we can. That's it from me.
Lovely, thanks Lloyd. And I know we're kind of on a bit of a timer, so I'm going to jump straight into challenges. So you'll see that we've got sort of one story, the Adapters Bikes. We've got 3 different ways that we're gathering stories, and we're totally aware that the collecting of stories from different perspectives rather than just the workers' experience, if you like, the staff, we're trying to get those. But that's the third point here is getting engagement from those with the grants to feed their stories in has been tricky, because they're amidst the excitement of it, and they're busy people as well. They've got their own lives alongside what it is they're trying to do with us. So we're needing to maybe shift things, how we do things in that way. Some of the other challenges around servicing negative behaviour. So when we were putting those flashcards together, initially we asked the illustrator to illustrate the change from maybe some, I'll say negative behaviours, but in the beginning where people perhaps weren't looking to connect or didn't want to listen to others, or these kinds of things, and she was going to illustrate that, and then where have we got to? We are talking to each other and kind of sharing learning and various, but it was thought that to show that kind of first place, if you like, of those more negative behaviours or not quite in line with what we're trying to get into the community, that would maybe compromise how people felt perceived, or maybe putting them in a negative light, and so maybe not really fully being able to show that whole journey, conscious of being sensitive, of course, to kind of people's experiences and how that moves forward with them. So there's still some work to be done about how can we really bring to life that whole journey, including maybe some of the stuff that wasn't particularly supportive of this process at the outset. And also, I mean, that holds true not only with the people involved on the ground, but also then in organisational stories, and how this links with that broader system as well, especially in terms of the council. And so that's one of the challenges. But also moving forward, as we said, we're moving into this kind of network where that's definitely going to expand the number of people and organisations involved, and then deciding where to place the resource. That we can't collect all the stories all the time. At the moment, we're managing to do most things with these stories, but that's going to change. So we need to have a way of deciding where to place that resource. And that's the end. So I'm doing it quite quickly because I know we're on a bit of a timer, but I'll stop my share. And I'll come to Rob.
That's fantastic, Esther and Lloyd. Covered so much ground actually in a very short amount of time. So appreciate that. And what we'll do now is we'll spend a few minutes. People may have clarification questions or things they want to probe a little bit further. We'll spend some time doing that, and then we'll move into some breakout groups where we can build on that. And it may be that we want to delve more into the Withensea example. It may be that people have their own sort of observations and experiences to compare. So first, some clarification questions. And we've got one from Chris in the chat about how long you typically schedule for these process chats that you were talking about. There may be other questions, so people either raise your hand or do it digitally, and we'll try and pick up some of those clarifications. So did one of you want to come back on that? There's sort of a little bit more on the detail of those chats.
Yeah, I can do that. So we tend to do it once every 6 months, so kind of giving that kind of bit of time to see kind of what's the project to develop and to change over time. And we tend to book in an hour per project with the lead for that project. So depending on who the development officer is, we'll just book in an hour throughout the week to say, right, let's talk about the adapted bike, for example, or talk about boxing. And it's a very loose kind of interview. We kind of do very much kind of like, okay, so this is where you were before. Tell us what's changed, what's happened in this period of time, and just letting people really just talk it through, and then asking kind of following question from that. So we have a kind of loose thing of kind of want to know what's happened, what have been the challenges, what have been the successes, what are the next steps. There probably have 4 or 5 questions that we focus on, but then if there's something coming up, something we're really interested in, we can then put focus down on that. Say, oh, so this happened, tell us a little bit more about that. Just so then we don't want to make them too short. We really want people to find the use of that kind of reflective piece and really understand exactly what's going on. and then kind of we record that through Teams as well, so we can take that back and really analyse that into more detail and do a bit of a summary for that, we can feed back to everybody.
Thanks, Lloyd.
It might be worth, sorry Rob, it might just be worth adding that as we're moving forward, we were just meeting with our external evaluators last week, and what we recognise as well is what needs to be part of those chats is maybe an emphasis of, well, you know, what feelings or emotions are you coming across that affects how you interact with people. So if things are going wrong or if things are difficult, then, you know, and they might cover that, but it's kind of trying to really pin that a little bit more, because it's those emotional responses that might prevent that interaction being as positive as it might be moving forward. So we're starting to move into that space a bit more as well.
Thanks, Esther. Other questions, clarification, sort of things people want to probe a bit further on this case example?
Maybe just another quick clarification from Lloyd, if I could.
Chris.
It sounds a great idea, Lloyd, that you're doing here. And I wondered, is this in response to maybe hoping and expecting sort of project leaders would do this on their own, and maybe they were struggling, so you thought, okay, maybe we need to offer a bit more support to try and make this process a bit easier for everybody? Or have you gone straight to this process?
I think it kind of makes you both, and it was probably a period of time where people have done a lot of work, quite reflective, but then because of drains and stresses of kind of normal everyday life and working life, it kind of that got lost a little bit. And we're finding we were losing a lot of this information, and a lot of kind of what we were doing already was we were getting some good kind of learning about outcomes, we were mapping connections, but we're missing that kind of more meaty detail and that kind of what really is been happening, because we happen to know projects are never kind of like A to B and really straightforward. It's about what actually are the challenges and how we're picking up on them. And we realise we weren't doing that. So my most effective way we thought of doing this was to really just having conversations with people, say to people, well, what is it that we're missing here? What if somebody else was going to do a project similar to you to this, what do you think they would need to know, kind of thing, and really give people that space to do that. Obviously it can be a bit kind of time consuming to that point and do it once every 6 months, but then it gives people that time to understand and the product development also means it's not taking up all our time each month just finding out all that information.
Yeah, because in Calderdale, we kind of hope and expect, I suppose, the project leaders maybe reflect and tease out some learning points on their own in isolation, maybe with a tiny bit of support. Here's a few sort of starting questions to get you to think and reflect. But it's proving difficult to get staff to do that because the pace of the project is so vast and so frantic. So I like this dedicated, protected space and time. This is when we're going to do it now. We've booked it out in the schedule. Yeah,
that's we found with people very similar, that we wanted people to have that space to reflect and that space time to do that, but it's not always possible. And much of people are like, oh yeah, sounds great, I'm going to do this. Then like you book in like an hour reflective time. If they get like phone calls or they get something else that's going on in that time, they're probably going to do that and they're going to be lost. So to have that kind of specific time where I sat down and talking to people doing it, they've got to do it effectively.
There's something interesting I just wanted to chip in, because it's just where our heads are going, where my team's heads are going anyway. First, we do something similar, but we have learning logs, and we have learning meetings once a month, so that captures that. But we're trying to look at sort of how can we more or less do this, not using Twitter, but tweet style, so we don't lose the stuff that happens on a day. Because when you go through that refining process of writing something in a learning log or doing an interview, you tend to tailor it more for the audience in your head. So there's something about we're playing around with it. Can we run something parallel to this, which is a little bit more gritty, and basically we've had a lousy day and this is why this didn't work, and just capturing it in the moment. But so a lot more rough than actually sitting down. So we're doing the longer stuff, but we're also looking at this sort of, can we do something that's very quick and dirty, more or less on a continuous basis, which captures the essence of what might be going on in a project and what might be, I don't know, either making it really good or making it really bad. So it's just it's just sort of going at it it's adding another layer in. I don't know if it'll work or not. I just thought I'd throw it in.
Thanks, Anthony. No, we've got quite a few nods. Sorry, go Esther, and then I've got Emily.
I was just going to say, I love that, Anthony, because exactly it's kind of that balance point between really getting it as it's hitting, and I think Lloyd is really good, Lloyd and Joe, because they're kind of a bit outside. They got that trust. They're kind of part of the team, but not. So it's not kind of effective. So they get more of the. I think they get to hear some of that stuff for sure. But like I say, having that immediacy kind of cuts out some of the work that goes on in the brain to sanitize. So yeah, I love that.
Emily.
Conscious not to take up too much time so you can move on. Similar
No,
to
do take the time, Emily. No, it's fine.
What you do, two things we're doing which I feel are actually related and might be worth sharing. And we do a learning pod process where bi-weekly across all of people with different work in our programs connect with someone randomly to walk and talk, and there's some guided questions, and so they have a learning pod partner. And then once a month we do a little survey just to tweak out some of the key things that came out of those conversations, so we're grabbing it in that way. The other thing that was established before my arrival was WhatsApp. So it was a big WhatsApp group, and whether you like it or love it, video updates. So I've come out of a meeting and this is what I learned: talk to camera, let it out, try to make it. There's a few sort of structures around what we use that WhatsApp group for and how we do those videos. No more than 3 minutes, little updates, key learnings, things I'll take takeaways, and so on. Little description of the video, who might be interested and why. And our comms team have grabbed all those WhatsApp videos. My challenge is to analyze them, do something with them, and one day I might find someone else to do that for me. But we've found that successful, really successful. But the challenge is not everyone is in the habit of doing it all the time, and a lot of our team have had to warm up to put their face on camera. But it is an easy grab.
Really interesting. I think sort of the permission and the habits to do this kind of reflection, which I think comes up time and time again, and you know, evident across the examples. Other issues? Sorry, go Esther.
Sorry, there is something here about it, the catharsis that's involved here of actually getting it out your gob and saying, you know, this is what it is, this is what's happening, rather than writing on a bit of paper, ticking a box. You know, there's something about that, and something about someone hearing it. And I know we know this, but I just thought I'd chip in how important that is.
I don't think we necessarily do know it, Esther. I think it's a really good point that having another person as a witness or part of the energy to share it, because there's so much of our work is just sort of filling boxes or doing little bits individually, and I'm not sure there's always energy or sort of scope to do that. Sorry, Anthony, were you going to come in?
I was just going to say, Timmy, I think there's something really important here about the psychological safety stuff and sort of just us developing that within teams. And I think this helps it, but obviously it depends where you're coming from. I can't imagine, I've had a history in the NHS and some councils, and the last place I worked was a bit like Game of Thrones, and nobody would have done this, to be quite honest. I work in the, you know, I obviously work for a not-for-profit now, and it's a very different environment, and people are probably a lot more open. So I think it's going to depend a little bit on internal politics. I just want to throw that in because, and I can understand the barriers that some organisations would have, particularly with the WhatsApp thing. I mean, none of my old team would have gone anywhere near a WhatsApp.
Yeah, I mean, you can see, Anthony, in our challenge, that's exactly what we came across with the council in particular. They don't want to hear particular bits of a story, or it's not palatable to this people or that people, and it gets held down. It gets kind of, you know, there's lots of that, and the psychological safety thing I think is absolutely vital, and which is I think what Lloyd and Joe kind of provide as this kind of side piece that isn't necessarily available in more formal channels. So yeah, massively important.
I'm going to say on the kind of that kind of psychological kind of about the cathartic stuff about kind of just getting it out there. Particularly one of our grant writers really enjoys the process chat just because of that kind of, she nicknamed it herself as like Project Therapy, where she's able to kind of just talk about everything that's been going on for the last 6 months on that specific project. She's got that base for that hour to say, God, yeah, this happened, and then this happened, and this was really good, and this was a bit not so good, and be able to get all that out where she maybe not got always have that kind of space, that time, or that or feel safe to do that. So to be able to do, she really values being able to do that, and sometimes she finds that she can then feel more motivated afterwards to kind of go and start working things again and kind of think, oh yeah, I've got that out now. what's my next steps, and really kind of frames that for ourselves to think about this is what I need to go and do next.
Thanks, Lloyd. I've got Emily next.
Yeah, just again, to build on that, I think we've been talking a lot amongst our leadership team kind of thing on, some of our best learning is from the stories we can't really tell publicly. And because they might be naming and shaming in one way or another. And so we're kind of trying to hustle with that right now as we prepare for this shares and the learning sort of report in October. And that's why there's reflective chats and walks and talks. It can be, you can confide in someone, and we talk about that being a safe space. There's a lot of build up to that, but you only report the stuff you're prepared to report. But there's that cathartic thing, as you say, Esther. But there is our biggest learning, really our biggest learning, is in the stuff we probably can't say out loud. And we just want to call that out at the moment, and we'll figure out what we do with that.
Very interesting. Caroline's added in the chat about it would be great if everyone shared their processes and tools for reflective practice. And it is amazing actually how many of you are reinventing the wheel and having to sort of find adequate ways to do that, because it seems like it's quite a subtle process despite the apparent simplicity. Any other threads people want to come back in on the story that we've had or reflections that it's led to? Because of time, I think let's carry on with the flow rather than the mechanics of going into groups, because there's quite a lot coming out. But any other avenues people want to pursue?
Rob, something that we've been thinking about is as we build in these processes into practice, whilst we've got some financial resource to help us do that, with someone at the end of it to kind of pull it all together and analyse it, etc. How do we sustain some of that beyond, I guess we're going to have to be quite pragmatic here, but beyond our funding period? So we're trying to strike a balance between having some resource to help us to do this, but not building up an industry around our evaluation, because we want to continue doing this beyond the status of the pilot.
And I guess just reflecting on the previous thread, that distinction between sort of maybe reflecting regularly and feeding it into work, and things that might then go into more broader reporting to inform future work in a more kind of obvious public way, comes to mind. But that's a great question, I think, Jodie. I mean, would others like to reflect on that sort of issue of how to sort of embed it and make it sustainable? Lauren, go.
Yeah, I think that resonates with us as well, in the fact that actually we're trying to do trying to embed it into other areas of work and get other people to do storytelling. But the problem is that the synthesis and an understanding of it then isn't there. And actually that's kind of a specialist skill that's required. So how can we embed the process of doing storytelling into things, but also actually embedding the understanding of what to pull out of it, how to pull things out of it, and then where to feed it in, is really difficult to try and embed all of that moving forward, because everybody has a very different perspective, and if you're trying to do it in an area of work, they have one view of what's important, but somebody else might see something different. So I think that's definitely resonates with us over here as well.
Thanks, Lauren. I've got Emily, Esther, and Lloyd, so we'll take them in that order. Emily?
Right. I think one of the things we've tried to do, and this might not reach all levels of who we're engaging with, but in terms of those of us who deliver on something and our reflective learning pod process, we've very much pitched that and coached that at a level of this is professional development, this is your part of your portfolio discussions. And in 2, 3, 4 years time, when you're applying for a job or promotion, these are impact stories. And if you can't describe succinctly what you've done with impact for your own benefit, then you're not going to get the job. And so by making it very personal to the storyteller, we found them engaged better in these. And so it has meaning to the individual telling the story. But there's lots more surrounds that, like you say, Lauren. But for a start, when we made it about them, we got them on board. And I mean, some colleagues working within voluntary sectors who are leading and working with us, who we would never, and they are surprised themselves who they're talking to. and what they're opening up about, but they're really seeing the benefits and enjoy it now, and are looking forward to being introduced in September to their next reflective partner and talking and learning from something new. So making them about them has been impactful for us.
Great. And Esther?
Yeah, I think, like you say, making it about them. There's something though that I'm just thinking back to when we had Nora Bateson over for a period of time, and she did the warm data labs, and it was just about people sitting in clusters, sharing their stories to each other around different contexts, and that over time, as people, you could move about into different contexts, and over time, people are hearing people's just natural stories, just kind of, this is what my life has been, this is what happened in my life, and then being able to, as a whole group, then notice what they noticed between the different groups that they sat in and the different people they heard from and how they told their different story. So I think that there's stuff that doesn't necessarily need to harvest something, but just that process, and in the room you could feel the kind of the level of understanding of each other, and therefore what they wanted to do together grew and expanded into something lovely. So there's something about not just harvesting, but what it does is itself as a process, and that I think for us to try and feed that into this network, it's good to hear each other's stories and to say, well, what does this mean then? And I guess you could tag that back into things like Theory U and such as well.
Thanks, Esther. And then I've got Lloyd.
Yeah, so my kind of one of the things we're working on actually in a minute is, like Esther mentioned, we've got a community kind of network developing, which is going to be hopefully our aim to kind of outlive us, so we can make it more, putting it back into the hands of the residents and the partners, and kind of then taking on physical activity. So when we're gone, let's do like a network going. So that's very new, but part of that we're very at the early days, introducing our evaluation tools straight from the off. So things like we use Kumu and using these storytelling and stuff. And with the hopes of kind of getting people interested and excited for it. So then when we have people signing up for it and want to volunteer for it, we can identify people that they can then take this on. So we have this period of time where we kind of training, or kind of say, this is what we need to be looking at, this is what kind of thing we're working on. So then we can have that kind of bit of handover in that time. So they go first and foremost, and then that is going to be hopefully continued within our part of that network to keep analysing and evaluating and understanding these stories coming along.
Thanks, Lloyd. I've got Anthony next, but then I'll ask if there's anyone else who hasn't contributed yet, if there's particular lines or angles you'd like to pursue. So Anthony, over to you.
I just wanted to pull two things in, really. I mean, I think we've got the process side of it quite well. We generate quite a lot of stories. We have a story. We have a repository for the stories. We have e-forms that frontline staff can either just put what we call a story lead in, so it's the basic information and gives it a chance to for us to follow them up, or they can actually, if they have a close link with somebody, they can write a story with a little bit of guidance. We have all that, and we've started to even get volunteers from the organisation, and who are now asking if they can come and help on the story side. So that bit's sort of running, and I don't say it's a well-oiled machine, but it's a machine that maybe works well on some days and goes a bit clunky on others. The other bit, I suppose, is to me, it's where we start thinking about what we can do, what more we can do with these. And I know you teased some of this out on the last session, but it was more to do with, well, yeah, my team's sort of thinking of how can we do thematic analysis? Is there some way of looking at the essence of those stories, what were the points of change, etc. But that starts to become quite time consuming, and I'm lucky enough to have a research team of 6 people, and but a lot of people won't have that, and it's like, well, how do we start doing that? What are the methods of doing it? But also, how does that go forward if you haven't got the luxury of having a research team, which or some dedicated resource to do that, which I think is just interesting, because that might, I mean, you've got to have somebody with a skill set to start. I mean, we're sort of thinking, can we do it like we do, that we analyse focus groups, because we've got, AI transcription software and things. Can we do it like that? So it's just, it's just of that third, that extra layer you can get out of it, which I think it's how that rolls on, and how people do that. over time, which I think is sort of interesting to me.
Definitely, and really interesting, I think, in terms of how stories have a role in relation to other kinds of information gathering, data analysis and reflection. We're going to take a short break in a minute, but I just wanted to give opportunity to anyone who hasn't chipped in if there's any particular things they want to raise or questions they want to ask. We're going to layer the conversation, so it's not like this is the last chance, but just wanted to give an opportunity for any new strands we haven't covered. Well, maybe what I'll suggest then is what I'd like to do now is just take a very short comfort break, but also in that time, loads has come out already. And thanks again for Lloyd and Esther for sort of diving in with all of this. But what I'd like you to do is individually during that break, maybe just jot down a few nagging questions or things that have come up for you that we haven't had time to discuss yet. And then what we'll do is when we come back from the break, is we'll hear the South Tees experience and we'll start to layer in some of these themes and juxtapose the two case stories together. So what I'm going to do is just give you, wait a minute, it's not going to work. I'm looking for my little screensaver. So we'll take 5 minutes and yeah, do stretch your legs, move around, grab a drink. But if you can also jot down a few thoughts just for your own train of thought, really, and how it links to your experience. And we'll come back in 5 minutes. Shall we get going again then, everyone? Everyone had a chance to have a stretch and jot a few things down. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the South Tees experience, have a presentation on some of their learning, similarly move into sort of some discussion around that, and then layer the two conversations in together. So over to Norma or Jen. I'm not sure who's presenting.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll just share my screen, if that's all right. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our presentation is going to have a slightly different focus. So our storytelling is going to focus more on our work with communities. We do storytelling with stakeholders, but that falls more under our process learning function. So I'll start by explaining why we decided we wanted to try storytelling in capturing insights and evaluation. So very early on in the pilot, we understood that numbers, although useful, would not capture the complexity of our work. We do run an adapted active lives survey annually, which can tell us how many people are active in our geographical area of focus, but it doesn't tell us about people's underlying reasons and motivations. And so we thought that this was a gap that storytelling might be able to fill. And we understood that using a qualitative methodology would help us to build a deeper and richer understanding of our communities and context. We work across two boroughs that are very different in terms of demographical makeup and political context. One is more urban, while the other is more rural. And we knew that numbers alone would not help us make sense of these nuanced and local experiences, and that storytelling might be able to help us fill these gaps. We also knew that we could use the insight from storytelling to inform our co-design process by helping us to make sense of the barriers people are facing and understand what they value or don't value about their communities, and then work with residents to address these issues. We also saw that storytelling could play an important role in informing what we commission. So we build our briefs around the insight that we get from communities. So storytelling, which is all about listening to communities and drawing out key insights, will be built into that process. And we work with a huge range of people, from clinicians to mental health organisations to Slimming World consultants. And a big part of what we do is bringing people together and creating awareness about the role that they play in getting people more active. So we needed a methodology that would capture the hearts and minds of a huge range of stakeholders and make it clearer what their role is in the system. And actually being able to see people behind the numbers, people who are talking about how physical activities improve their mobility, mental health, and has helped in their weight loss journey, could help us in addressing the empathy gap, while showing through the stories how our work and the work of our partners intersect and are connected. And because storytelling is a very accessible methodology, we saw that it could easily be used across all our different work streams, and that all our work streams could benefit from it. So almost 3 years ago, we commissioned a dedicated storytelling team led by Norma Wilburn to help us with this work.
Okay. So where did we start? And as Jen's explained, we knew what we wanted storytelling to do. We had a wealth of experience in qualitative research. We knew how to present stories for impact and influence, but we believed by using a test and learn approach, we could capture that crucial learning points and the unintended consequences. Okay, so first of all, we had to decide whose stories we should be collecting. And as Jen alluded to a moment ago, we wanted to be sure that storytelling didn't cross over into the approach used by the pilot's process learning team. And so we focused on the stories of participants and direct deliverers. We developed a broad framework around insight into why people engaged and why they didn't, and why people participated in activity and why they did not. We also captured stories of success and achievement to encourage other people. But what was clear from the start, working with participants though, was that engagement, activity and success were closely linked with mental health, and that supporting and empowering was a precursor to engagement and activity, and certainly a precursor to gaining the stories. So therefore, many of our original stories were longitudinal, making contact, building trust, capturing stories over time. So what that meant, in fact, was that we would be working with participants for months sometimes before we actually started to tell a story. So capturing the stories, what approaches did we use? Well, clearly, largely by being there. We were there for months, sometimes, not all of the time, but regular contact. Knowing where things were happening was important. Sometimes through the team about projects that were being commissioned, or getting involved with community groups who weren't involved necessarily with YGT projects at that point. When relationships have been built, we use video and audio recording, always explaining what the framework of the story might be, who the audience will be, and where it will be used, and gaining consent. And part of that consent was to ensure that the story is shared first with the storytellers before it's shared with anyone else. Many of the stories that we captured have several participants talking about their experiences, their shared experiences, but sometimes their shared experiences were different, even though they were working on a similar project or working in the same field. We might have hours of recording, and the reviewing and analysing, the sort of thematic analysis that was reflected earlier, mentioned earlier on, is lengthy and time consuming. And we try to keep to the key elements of storytelling: characters, plot, conflict, resolution, outcome, and learning. So in creating the story, we identify what really matters, illustrate the values that people have, and more importantly, try to ensure change, enable people to make sense of their activities.
Real, thanks, Norma. I'll take us from there. So how do we use stories? There's a number of different reasons why we use stories, and it kind of shows the difference that the pilot is trying to make when we work with other organisations within our place. So journey mapping forms part of the evaluation. You know, we use storytelling to allow us to understand how we're doing with the pieces of work that we're delivering through the pilot. It doesn't just capture the stories of people, but it also captures the story of our places, how people perceive where they live. We use storytelling to kind of identify how pieces of land are used, I suppose, and people's perceptions of those, and hopefully those perceptions change over time. If we try and use the pilot to influence people's perceptions, it identifies gaps and opportunities within our work, and I suppose we've mentioned before that storytelling is a massive factor in helping us decide what we commission. So by collecting stories, we're constantly learning about whether our thought processes are right and we are going in the right direction with some of our work. It informs our co-design process and what we commission. So I've literally just said that in my previous comment there. You know, it forms part of our data and our knowledge base that we commission the right pieces of work, and we're doing things that communities need. It definitely creates a different type of social media and marketing data, I suppose. Quite powerful to be able to share some of these stories where possible through our social media and our marketing platforms to kind of highlight what the pilot's doing and who it's doing with. And again, I guess it's just a very strong tool to our armory around creating a community voice. I suppose for me, and seeing some of the videos that we've created, you know, it's massively important for us because we develop and create some really true to life data, but I suppose the people that are asked to participate in storytelling, they feel like a part of the pilot as well, and they feel that they're listened to, and hopefully as the pilot progresses, if we do that more and more, then we'll hopefully build a sense of, well, this pilot is for us in our places. You know, we've got 4 local specific authority wards we work in, And hopefully if we get more people contributing to storytelling and giving their side of the story, then when they see work develop in their place, then they'll feel like they've had a contributing factor to that, because it'll be like, oh, well, actually, I can see something happening in our place, and actually that resonates with what I said to Norma or whoever, and actually I'm being listened to. And we know that, you know, before the pilot, some of our local authority wards were very heavily funded through other programs and pilots, and some of the outcomes of those works were completely different to what the community wanted, and we were almost fighting a losing battle because we knew that communities felt that they weren't being listened to. So storytelling really helps us with that.
Okay, so just to build on what James has just been saying, through the process of telling their story and knowing that we believe that their story is important, is a major confidence builder. And Esther mentioned earlier about the importance of being heard, and that for us is a very key point as well. By empowering people, and that's what we think that people telling their story does. By empowering people, we found that this encourages them to consider in more depth what they're saying, reflecting on their behaviour and their feelings, and reflecting on what's gone wrong as well as what's gone well, and what could develop, and what was not necessary. So it allows people and encourages people to talk about all of the negative responses that we were talking about earlier from Withensea. And because it's their story, the storytellers have control over their own narrative, and by giving that control actually creates greater confidence and greater, in many senses, a deeper and more insightful story.
So not to be left out, you're going to hear from me as well. So how does it help us as a pilot? As we've said, around influencing and advocates and kind of support for the pilot, one of the key elements that we feel around creating our common purpose in our place is actually sharing some of this insight that we have with all of the stakeholders and other people within our place. And I think one of the strengths of our pilot, and kind of what people probably see as the currency of what we've got, is the actual detail of insight that we have around a place that probably other programs have never had. We're hearing from people that have never been consulted, or asking questions that have never been asked, because we're asking around a place and about what it means to them and where they live, rather than around a topic of physical activity. We're not asking the questions that we want to get answered, we're just asking to actually listen. Capturing the complexity and wider impacts of the programme, we don't really see how else we could be capturing some of that and some of the experiences of people, because we see it through a different lens. But also actually by just talking more openly, we capture loads of unintentional outcomes that we didn't anticipate. So some of the stories we've got have got people talking about how they've come off medication by being involved in a programme around volunteering. We probably would never have got that if we'd asked them on a survey about how they've felt through a programme. It comes through the trust that they have with Norma, to actually then share those pieces of information with her. Illustrating the value and the barriers that we've got, the value of the work, but also actually the values that people have, so we can build upon that. And also identifying the barriers, so then, as we've said previously, commissioning our work based on that. And also just identifying some commonality between what we're seeing. It identifies emerging themes, which we can align with some of our AI work and other kind of pieces of insight that we've had to gain a kind of big picture around actually this is something that we need to address or look at collectively.
Okay, so challenges. Not everyone wants to tell their story, and people are concerned about how their stories might be used. And a lack of confidence can result in a perception that they don't have a story to tell. Will you tell me your story? Oh, I don't have any story. They feel that their experiences will lack value, and that building of trust takes time, and time is a big issue here. The importance of hearing the voice of the person telling the story and capturing the visual clues on how they feel, rather than interpretation of what our interpretation may be of what's being said. We believe it's vital that we use some form of recording and ideally video recording, but of course not everybody's comfortable with this, so we do use audio and contemporaneous notes as well. If we think about the deliverers of projects as well, initially, I think it's true to say that the deliverers interpreted the storytelling process as a means of marketing their activities rather than the form of evaluation. And that, you know, if we're coming to video, they wanted us to video the good bits, to talk to the successful people. And I think that has been a challenge for us. And again, it's a matter of building trust and building confidence. The person whose story is being told controls the narrative, but the storyteller can't be the only one who's the arbiter of what's important and why. Making sense of the stories and the learning has to be a shared process, and to facilitate that presents its own challenges. But I think we're going to touch on that shortly on another slide.
So challenges for us as a pilot, obviously as Norma's kind of, some of it's obviously connected to the storyteller and their challenges as well. But one of the things is actually trying to convince others. So kind of how can we actually share the value and other people understanding that this is really important. And also some of the clashes that we have with other funders within our area, putting kind of a greater emphasis on the quantitative of counting widgets, then we're saying, we'd love to hear about all the nice fluffy stories, please. It then kind of comes, trying to get that balance right is really difficult for us. One of the things we're trying to do is around how we can embed some of the value of these approaches in the work that we're commissioning, so that not only are we trying to capture the stories of our place, but we're actually empowering some of our ambassadors within our programme to actually capture stories as well. But then an issue comes to that around capacity to actually upskill them in doing that. We're a small core team, and Norma is obviously commissioned around capturing stories, so it's really difficult to try and understand. And we have started that process, which has gained us a greater understanding of the barriers that they've got in place of capturing those stories. And it's not just the time, but it's the value and the understanding of what do you want to hear, how do you want to hear it, what's important as well. And as Norma said, around just getting that balance and understanding and common understanding between us and the work that we commission, that the story is not just of the success, but the story is of what they've learned and the barriers and the experiences through the, it's capturing a journey, not just all the sunshine and rainbows. And also sharing the stories. We have a real one of our challenges at the moment is trying to share the stories and understanding what's meaningful for other people. Who do you need to share it with? How do you need to share it with them? With what? But also actually, as Norma stated, there's volumes of it. So how do we kind of distill that down into something that resonates quite quickly with people that maybe don't have the time to take to watch a 12-minute video from a person, and then picking out the value themselves is probably one of our other challenges at the moment.
Okay, so what have we found? Let's really be honest and say sometimes how a programme is to be evaluated is considered when everything else has been decided. And yeah, storytelling seems like a good idea. And that's led initially to bolting on storytelling and not allowing the time it takes for building it into the programme. So that's been an issue that we've needed to, a challenge that we've needed to address. Storytelling is time intensive, time in engaging and eliciting stories, time to hear the stories, generally from more than one person over a period of time, time to review, consider, analyse and create. And we are, I'm sure somebody's going to pick up on this, either Jen or Lauren in a minute, using, for example, most significant change approach. I have to say that storytelling isn't rocket science. I think somebody said earlier on today in the group that actually we all tell stories. Everybody tells stories. It's part of being human. We all tell stories about what we've done, and most people involved in the community already have the skills of actually recognizing and telling stories and hearing stories. So the YGT approach going forward is likely to encourage partners to collect their own stories, and they will utilize those skills. It's important, though, to be able to balance relationships and to ensure that consent for participants telling their stories is appropriate, and to be negative is consented to. The commitment to spend time needed when everyone wants to do what they're there to do. Everybody's excited. We've got a project. We're working together with partners. We're really wanting to get on with this. So actually, the commitment to spend the time on stories, a real challenge to overcome, and the importance of convincing people of the value and sharing of examples is essential.
So when we started using storytelling in the evaluation of programs, we didn't adhere to any particular technique. So how we started out doing it is we draw up an evaluation framework, which included the outcomes we thought we might see, and then our storytelling team would work on the ground capturing the participant journey. It was then up to the storytelling team and the pilot team to pick out items of value from the stories. And doing it this way got us a lot of insight, as Lauren and Norma said, but the deliverers weren't heavily involved in the evaluation, and fundamentally, we didn't learn what it was that the deliverers valued in the stories, or what was the most significant story to them and why. So we were missing this key bit of learning, but we've started to experiment with the most significant change, which is a tried and tested technique used in evaluation, and is a much more organised way of collecting stories. And importantly, it gets the deliverers to really think about what it is that they value in the stories and why. And this is a technique we're going to be continuing to explore. And as Lauren said, we're working with our stakeholders to upskill their methods, like the most significant change, and exploring how they can apply it to their own work. And finally, since we've been doing storytelling, there hasn't been a proper function for sharing the insight and learning from that process. How we've been sharing it is myself or another member of the team would share it with the relevant stakeholders when they think it might be useful to their work. This has meant that perhaps not everyone who could have benefited from the insight and learning from storytelling has had access to it. And stakeholders in our area also haven't had the opportunity to share their own insights and learning in an organised way. So working with Yorkshire Sport, we have developed an online learning bank where all this information will be held, and it will be accessible to YGT ambassadors across the South Tees, and stakeholders will be encouraged to upload their own insight and learning from things like storytelling as well. And this will hopefully create a bit more of a dialogue around evaluation methods and the learning and insight that's coming out of it. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation.
Thanks to the team for another fantastically rich presentation. So many things in there. We've got a bit of time to sort of ask clarification questions and then sort of segue into further discussion and building on the discussion we had before. So yeah, the floor's open for people to raise questions or add in reflections. Well, perhaps I can just kick us off with I noticed that Esther mentioned earlier this issue of people coming forward and being ready to tell their story, and Norma talked quite a bit about, well, the team talked quite a bit about laying the groundwork for people being actually ready, feel confident enough to do that storytelling. So I just wondered from both teams really, whether there were things you'd learned around how you make that happen, how you make people feel comfortable. And I've got Emily as well, so maybe I'll let Emily chip in her question while people reflect on that and come back for an answer. So over to you, Emily.
It kind of builds on what you've just said, Rob. I just love the statement or the consideration of to be negative is consented to. And in fact, it's something that I'm working with. To be negative is consented to, and also to be negative is encouraged. And based on what we learn from that.
And if I may, just adding, I was also struck by, Norma, you mentioned that people having that space to talk, or sorry, again, I can't remember which of the team mentioned it, but having that space allowed people to tell the negative stories. And certainly in my experience, there is a lot of reticence about that. And as Emily, you said earlier, some things can be shared publicly and other things have to be, has to be agreed that they're not necessarily shared. But obviously a lot of the learning comes in those negative bits as well. So it's a really difficult one to get right. Esther.
I'm just remembering back to when we first started, and there was a group of people at I think it was the Victoria Day Centre mentioned in Adam's video, and the people working on the ground were running like a youth club or a kind of just a socialising club in the evenings for people with physical difficulties, and it took that, I remember at the time that it took, I think it was the third or fourth time of kind of meeting and getting to know and kind of getting to trust before they would say anything really and to give anything. So I think just a matter of giving that time, and not time, or were you ready to tell us your story yet? Just chilling, you know, just kind of finding out a little about each other and kind of just being with, I suppose. Yeah. And the other thing that comes to my mind is in some early work was around how the same incident or the same group of activities or whatever can be seen so differently by different people. Yeah. So I wonder about whilst people tell their own stories and those negative pieces in there being difficult, but I think what we're interested in and we haven't quite got to is how one thing might appear differently from the point of view of the person on the ground, the person kind of who's in the community, and also then how do they say actually that's not what happened from where I'm sat? How do they hold the difference between this is my experience and that differs to yours? And I think that bit is core to how working collectively and across a system and across layers, if you like, is absolutely core to how can we understand each other without falling out about it and having a shared something. So I think that's yeah, really key.
Thanks, Esther. I've got Heba next, and after Heba we've got Chris.
Hi, so I've essentially got 2 follow-up questions. So building on that, the stuff about negative experiences, I was just wondering if anyone's got any advice on how we sort of encourage those negative experiences and reflections, because that's something that's really hard to get people to talk about. Because I think even asking the question of how something went, people assume you want to hear the good stuff. So that's the first question. And the second one is probably the more difficult one, but if there has been negative experience of like a program, how do we then as evaluators relay that back to those higher up in a way that they can use?
Great questions, Heba, and I think it'd be good to layer them into the team's responses. I've got Chris and then Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I suppose my question is a bit more generic, just in the room, really. I was reading a book recently about behavioral science, and one thing that was mentioned in there is about oblique questioning. And I've been thinking about it a bit recently. So if we're interested in a particular outcome, for instance, outcome A, you know, rather than just going straight in and saying, hey, you're interested in this, could you tell us what you think about that or how you've experienced outcome A? How could we maybe approach that from a slightly different angle, but still get the information that we need? Because we've mentioned a few things today. We've mentioned accessing people's accounts. We've mentioned time, trust, psychological safety, concerns of failure, or maybe things that haven't worked out. So clearly accessing this information is quite important, and we could go straight, boom, interested in this, tell us about that. But I think most of you probably know that isn't always the best approach. So how could we kind of dance around the issue but still get to the issue, which I know is a hard question to answer? But so has anybody got an example maybe of particular questioning techniques that they use to get people to open up about something of interest?
Thanks, Chris. I've got Caroline and then Esther.
Sorry, everybody, I'd left my mute on. Mine's a bit more of a practical question. When we're talking about gathering stories, obviously it's quite a skill to get that information from people. And I just wondered whether you trained people up, what training you did, and if you targeted specific cohorts of people.
Thanks, Caroline. So over to Esther, and then perhaps we can get either of the teams to respond to some of those more practical questions.
I mean, just quickly in response to Chris's thing about oblique sort of storytelling, I'm familiar with this. Well, I will say familiar, but through Dave Snowden's work and his work with SenseMaker and how he frames how to go about this work with complexity. So I think maybe looking at Dave Snowden's stuff might give you some stuff. It's a few years ago since I was in depth around this, but it's exactly as you say. This obliqueness, and that also ties back into the Nora Bateson stuff that I told you about earlier. So that was one thing. In terms of the negative stories, something that I came across previously that is helpful is normalizing it. Is kind of right. So what we all do now is we all go around and we all pick fault with everyone's stuff, and that's what we do, and we all have a laugh about it. It's all fine, you know. And rather than, well, tell me about how difficult it's been. You know, it's kind of just, yeah, we're all doing this, and this is what we do.
Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, I wonder whether that, picking up on that and keeping with that negative stories theme, I wonder whether the South Tees, because it's something you mentioned that you've given people space to tell. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on how you facilitate that and how make it happen.
I think I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's around empathetic listening. Actually, if you ask somebody to tell you about their involvement in a project, what they enjoyed, if they found anything difficult, and remember that we've known these people and we've been with them, and I use the word participant observation sort of like almost, I think earlier in the thing. It's actually being there and being part of their group. I think one of the advantages we've had in South Tees, which we need to think about going forward, is that as the storytellers, we've been somewhat separate from the team. We're not seen as part of the team. We are in no way involved in the funding or the decision making about what's happening. We are sort of community based, and I think that's got an advantage, which we probably need to think about when we go forward about how we deal with that. I think that's a challenge we haven't really thought through yet. I mean, maybe Jen and the team have, but I think we need to think about that. And empathetic listening allows you to actually hear when something negative is being said, when something negative may be happening, and you ask how you feel. You don't say, why are you disappointed or why are you unhappy? You ask, how do you feel about that? And I think that how do you feel can elicit the negative as well as the positive. Anyway, we are as I say, we are listeners, and from that listening can develop what the story is, I think. I don't know whether that helps. Does anybody else want to throw in?
I wanted to just add on that, Norma, before asking the rest of your team to come in. One of the premises for me of using stories is it isn't a focus question, and it is in a way an oblique approach. It allows people to sort of tell their narrative, and even where we've kind of suggested domains, you know, maybe we're talking about whatever it may be, growing confidence, or people tend to tell their own story regardless if they feel comfortable, and it sort of forces you into that listening role and engaging role, which I think is quite different from that more focus research approach, which some of us also have, and which is why I think the time involved in just being with people, being with them long enough to be on their level, and then they're going to start talking about stuff in an open-ended way is so crucial, but also often seen as a cost that people can't really afford in a short-term program. Hannah, go ahead.
Wow, this is all so interesting and fascinating. It resonates so much, and building on what people have said regarding building trust before people are likely to share their stories, and Norma's really useful question. Also, I wonder about the role of almost like an oblique but directed reflection, if you do want the bad, more of the negative stuff, simply around that sounds hard or frustrating or difficult, then people tend to elaborate on that, and you're inviting them to go, oh, this sounds like that's challenging for you. tell us more about it. So like a reflection even. It's a really practical tool.
Thanks, Anna. Anyone else from the South team wanted to build on what Norma was saying about those negative, eliciting those negative things?
Kind of, I think that what Norma was talking about as well is when we were kind of developing what our storytelling kind of needed to look like and should look like. All of the core team, including Jen, who's obviously is kind of key in what this looks like, we all did motivational interviewing. So actually, I think that's some of the foundation of actually how we've created some of our storytelling approaches is utilising the MI stuff that kind of Hannah's reflected on just then. It's utilising those skills to actually gain the story rather than using it in a way of a, an interview. There's no questions. It's a listening role, and actually the story goes wherever it needs to go, and where that person, where the participant feels it needs to go, rather than trying to gain something that we want to understand. It's our role to understand it more, not for them to actually understand it and tell us an answer. So I think that's some of the difference is actually we don't go to ask a story because we want an answer. We go to listen.
I think, again, just one of the paradoxes, we all talked about everyone tells stories, and actually people are quite relaxed about telling stories. It's something they're used to. And yet listening carefully and being there, empathetic listening is a skill. So that is a bit of a paradox. It's like everyone can do it, but actually there is quite a lot of work that goes into doing it well. I've got Chris and then Esther, and then we're going to have to think about moving on. So Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to throw something else in, I suppose, and I'm totally on board with the approach of like that open and inductive discussions, and if you want to call it interview techniques, is valuable. But equally on the other side, like my LDP, for instance, Calderdale, it has a specific strategic approach. It has a program theory that is established that we're attempting to roll out and enact with different types of projects across the community, and we have limited resource. Like the evaluation team at the moment is me, really. We've got a new person joining us, which is great, so it's going to double. So that totally open and expansive storytelling, I get that is very valuable, but it feels a bit of a luxury actually at the moment, and maybe a slightly more focused and deductive approach to me feels and sounds a better use of my time. So it's that weighing up, well, how allowing the stories to track where people want them to, great, but we do have areas of interest, that strategic approach that we're taking. So I feel a middle ground needs to be struck.
Great challenge, I think, Chris. So actually I've got Esther and Lauren. I'm going to have to just take you two, and then we're going to have to do some wrapping up. So over to you, Esther.
Yeah, I just wanted to, about the empathetic listening and about the motivational interviewing. I just wanted to draw attention to the theory use stuff and about the levels of listening in there. There are different levels of listening for different purposes, and they're all valid. And what do we do most of, and are we consciously moving into those? And so also in that is the engagement of the mind, but also then the heart, and then also the gut. So let's not forget that there are different ways that we sit as we ask these questions, and that we're in those processes, and that we're asking different things within those. And then like Chris is just saying, maybe for his stuff, maybe we need to sit more in the mind, and we're just really trying to prove a theory or trying to look at that. And maybe the other stuff is the heart-based stuff, where we're trying to look, well, what is the complexity of how this feels and is for these people?
Thanks, Esther. And over to you, Lauren.
Yeah, kind of just as a bit to kind of build on what Chris said, is actually some of it is the purpose of what you're using the storytelling for. And I think as we kind of move through the program, like our pilot program, it's evolved and changed based on who's doing the storytelling. It's not always Norma. We're trying to get stakeholders to do it as well within their work. And then some of the purpose then changes, but also it's that thing of trying to say that the evaluation needs to be mixed. So we don't see storytelling as the only element of our evaluation. It comes and that adds into the whole community voice, which is a real kind of blended of, interviews, questionnaires, surveys, as well as storytelling and AI and other things. So actually, we try and see storytelling isn't the magic bullet that's going to kind of fix everything, but it gives us a different perspective that we feel like if we don't do it, we're missing a massive gap. So it's some of that is, I think sometimes is understanding the purpose of what you're trying to actually capture, and then using the right method. Storytelling probably isn't the right method if you've got a specific question. That's probably an interview or of a survey, but actually trying to get to a goal, it's trying to understand what the trust is that you're trying to build, and get the answer that you need, really, and the response you're wanting, because we don't use it for everything, because we know it's not the right method for all that we're trying to create.
Thanks, Lauren. I hate to say it, but we're kind of out of time. We've feels like we've just scratched the surface, and actually some really, really important questions and insights have emerged. We've also got a few additional insights and questions in the chat. So with our remaining 5 minutes, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask Anne-Sophie to share a link to a Padlet. And on the Padlet, I'd like you to just maybe gather some of the insights that have emerged for you during this session, but also issues you'd like to spend some time discussing in more depth. In fact, just let me quickly share that to show you what I'm talking about. And I'm going to remove some of the little, can everyone see the Padlet there highlighted? Yeah, just going to remove the ones that I've got put in as examples. So all you need to do is click on one of these, and it will give you a topic, and you can write something in the subject here. So, and then you can write something further down, a bit more detail. And because of where my screen is, I can't actually post it. Let's see, publish. So really like to gather just some of your thoughts and insights. You should be able to get your own approach to that through the link in the chat that Anne-Sophie's just put in. And what we'll do, because we've sort of kind of run out of time inevitably because the discussion was so rich, we will get you to sort of put some of those things on the Padlet, and I'll actually leave that open for the rest of the day. So if you haven't got time now and you've got to rush off for a meeting, it will still be there on that link. So do take the link with you. But as well as insights and issues to discuss in more depth, which we may focus on in a smaller sessions in future, examples that you might want to share. We've had some really rich examples today from Withensea and South Tees, and some of the other pilots may also have an experience they want to share. So I'll stop sharing that now. You should be able to access that individually. So if you just spend a few minutes adding your own thoughts and insights, and then we'll wrap up in a few minutes' time. Kev, did you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, Rob, I'm not sure when is the best time. Well, I suppose we are kind of towards the end. I just wanted to say, you know, it's been great listening in on all of the conversation today from my perspective. And it's possibly a good time, Rob, to just talk about the learning clusters.
Indeed, yeah.
And kind of what happens from this. So
maybe we'll maybe just let people add to the Padlet, and then we'll come back to that in the roundup. That's a great idea.
That's fine. Just bring me in then, Rob. That's fine.
Okay. So just give you a couple more minutes to add. Are people managing to access that Padlet okay? Yeah. I'll just give you a couple more minutes to scribble some things down virtually, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so while you're still adding things, and in order not to keep everyone late, because I know everyone's always got hectic schedules, and it's been a very intense session, but I wanted to thank everyone for your participation. I know it's been intense, but there's been some really great things that have come up. What I'll do is follow up with a gathering of some of the issues you're putting together now, and probably a survey on what you might want to do next. And one of the issues we're looking at is that there's quite a lot of interest in storytelling as one of a number of different methods of evaluation and learning. So I might just hand over to you, Kev, to say a little bit more about linking to the learning clusters.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So what I just wanted to say quickly is that up to this date, I suppose, we've delivered a number of sessions around specific evaluation methodologies and approaches. Some of you on the call today have been to some of the previous sessions that we've run, things on explanatory frameworks, KT, things around explanatory assumptions and beliefs. So we've done quite a bit all so far, but what we're keen to do next is think about what does all of this learning, or this fostering of richness around the experiences that we're having across the LDPs is having, and what does that mean for us moving forwards in terms of the learning. So one of the things that we're going to be doing in September is launching our learning clusters, which basically draws upon some specific topics that we think, based on our engagement with all of the LDPs over the last year, are pertinent areas. And one of the areas in particular, which I think this fits in, is around the learning cluster around innovative approaches to enhancing evaluation, basically. So within that, we think that storytelling, things and significant change, for example, is particularly a sub-learning cluster in itself. So the where to next bit, from my perspective, is what we do with the group that's come together today. Is there anyone in this on the call, anyone in this group who is keen to kind of step forward and offer to start to maybe lead some of the subclusters, obviously with our support and our help around the technical side of things, but we're really keen to progress that on in terms of starting to move it forward. So we continue to talk about these things, and already we're over time, we can talk about these things constantly. So we're really keen to start to move that forward. So there will be information coming out from ourselves very shortly about how to access that and how to get involved. There'll be other learning clusters as well, which I'm sure you guys would want to dip into. But I just wanted to promote that. Rob, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just sort of watch this space. We'll be sharing information about that very soon. And as I said, thanks again, everyone, for the rich engagement, and the presenters for sort of sharing so much very concisely. It's a skill that's quite hard to get right, but it's been fantastic. I will leave the Padlet open, so do feel free to add things, or do email me if there's other things you'd like to pick up around this. And as Kev said, we'll find a way of picking it up and linking it to the innovative methods stream probably. With that, thanks everyone for your time and energy, and have a good rest of your day. So we'll say goodbye.